In this video, I'm going to show you how to knit a blanket design that I am naming Noah. Now, as my blankets go, this is at the simpler end of the spectrum. It's just an 8-row repeat and just knit and purl stitches, so it is super quick to pick up. And for those of you who are familiar with knitting stitches, you might notice that the middle textured panel in this blanket is diamond brocade stitch, but all I have done to make it easier for the newer knitters amongst you is work out the calculations for how big you want to make your blanket and how many repeats you need to work, and not forgetting this lovely garter stitch edge that I always like to use. To knit a blanket like mine that's 60 centimetres wide by about 80 centimetres long, you're going to need 400 grams of double knit yarn. For those of you outside the UK, that is light worsted weight or 3-weight yarn, but you can of course use any yarn that you like. You're just going to need to make sure that you use the right size needles for the yarn that you're using, and then adjust your cast on and the number of repeats that you work. You are also going to need some circular needles. You want them to be 4mm in diameter and at least 80 centimetres long. Anything shorter than that and you won't be able to accommodate the number of stitches that you need to cast on. Alongside that, you are going to find it handy to have some embroidery scissors and tapestry needles for when you need to change to a new yarn ball. And then last but definitely not least, you are going to need 2 stitch markers, and we're going to use those to separate where our side borders start and end to make it easier to knit this middle textured panel. When it comes to my blankets, I like to give you the pattern multiple for that middle textured panel separately to the stitches that we cast on for that garter stitch border. That just gives you the freedom to change the border if you want to without having to work out what the pattern multiple for the middle textured panel will be. For Noah, the pattern multiple for that middle textured panel is 8 plus 1. So you are going to cast on in multiples of 8, 8, 8, 8, and then when you have the width that you want, you are going to add 1 additional stitch. Then you need to add 18 stitches for your garter stitch border, and that equates to 9 stitches for either side. If you want to cast on a blanket the same size as my sample blanket, you are going to need to cast on a total of 131 stitches, and that number includes the stitches for the middle textured panel and the stitches for your borders. So that is the total number that you need to cast on. I'm going to cast on just a very small sample today using the long tail cast on method. That's the method that I prefer, and if you have a method that you prefer, then you can use that instead. This blanket will still work. This blanket is knitted all in one piece from bottom to top. So the first part of the blanket that we need to tackle is that bottom garter stitch border. That consists of 15 rows worked in exactly the same way. I'm going to talk you through row 1, and then I'm going to leave you to carry on and work rows 2 to 15 yourself. So to start with, you are wanting to knit all the way across your row, knitting every single stitch until you have just 1 stitch left to work on your left hand needle. So that's 1 stitch before the end of the row. We are going to work this final stitch in the row slightly differently to give us a really nice neat braided effect up the long edges of our blanket. You will often see this referred to as a selvage stitch. So the technique we are going to use for this particular selvage is we are going to slip the stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. So first things first, you want to get your working yarn to the front of your work instead of being at the back like it is currently. I'm a continental knitter, so I do that by just lifting and holding that yarn with my right hand needle. But if you prefer to lift it all the way to the front and have it hanging to the front of the work, that's fine too. Once you've moved your yarn to the front of your work, you are going to pop this right hand needle into that final stitch from right through to left, so as if you were going to work a purl stitch. What you don't want to do is go in as if to knit, so from left through to right, because that will twist the stitch and we don't want to do that. So slide it firmly onto your right hand needle, and once you're confident that it's safely on this right hand needle, you can take your left hand needle out. And then if you have held your yarn like I have, you want to just lift it to the front of your work and make sure it is definitely there, because if you don't and you turn and start knitting, you're going to accidentally create a new stitch. So that is row 1 of 15 done. I'm going to now leave you to carry on and work rows 2 to 15 yourself, and then I will come back and show you how we work that middle textured panel. Now that our bottom garter stitch border is done, we are ready to jump into the 8-row repeat that forms the bulk of our blanket. The first time we work row 1, we're going to do a little bit of setup work just to get our stitch markers in place, but every other time you work row 1, you're just going to slip those stitch markers instead of placing them. In this blanket, our odd numbered rows form the right side of our work, and what that means is every time you are knitting an odd numbered row, you will have the right side of your work facing you. So to start row 1, you want to knit 9 stitches. Once you've knit those 9 stitches, you are going to grab the first of your 2 stitch markers and just pop it onto your right hand needle. Next, you are going to purl 1 stitch. And now you're going to jump into an 8 stitch repeat that you are going to work until 9 stitches before the end of the row, and that repeat goes as follows. You are going to knit 7, and purl 1. And you're going to repeat that combination of knit 7 and purl 1 until 9 stitches before the end of the row, and that should come after you have worked a purl 1. Once you reach that point, you are going to grab the second of your 2 stitch markers and again pop it onto your right hand needle just to mark where your side border will start. Then you want to carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. That leaves us with just our selvage stitch to work, and just like we did for our border, we are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 2 starts by knitting 9 stitches, and this is a good point to check that your stitch marker is in the right place, because you should hit that stitch marker after your 9th stitch. Slip the marker over when you get to it, and then you are going to purl 1 stitch. Now we're going to jump into an 8 stitch repeat that we're going to work all the way along our row until we hit our second marker, and that repeat goes as follows. You are going to knit 1, purl 5, knit 1, and then purl 1. Just once more, that is knit 1, purl 5, then knit 1 and purl 1, and you're going to repeat that all the way along until you hit your second marker, and you should hit your second marker after a full repeat, so after that purl 1. Slip your second marker over when you get to it, and then carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. Finish your row by slipping that last stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 3 by knitting until you hit that first stitch marker. Slip the marker over and then carry on and knit 2 more stitches. Then purl 1 stitch. And now we're going to jump into a 4 stitch repeat that we are going to repeat across until 2 stitches before our second marker. And that is as follows. You are going to knit 3 and purl 1. Just once more, that is knit 3 and purl 1, and you're going to work that all the way across your row until 2 stitches before your marker, and once again, if you count your stitches correctly, that should come after you have worked a purl 1. The 2 stitches before your second marker, you just want to knit, slip your marker over, and then knit the next 8 stitches. Finish off and slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 4, start by knitting 9 stitches. Slip your marker over, and then you are going to purl the next 3 stitches. Then knit 1 stitch, purl 1 stitch, and knit 1 stitch. And now you're going to jump into an 8 stitch repeat that you are going to repeat all the way along until 3 stitches before your second marker. And that stitch repeat goes as follows. You are going to purl 5, then knit 1, purl 1 and knit 1. Once more, that's purl 5, and then knit 1, purl 1, knit 1. And if you count correctly, you should hit 3 stitches before your second marker after that final knit 1. The final 3 stitches before your second marker, you are just going to purl. Then slip your marker over and knit 8 stitches. Last but not least, slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 5 starts by knitting until you hit that first stitch marker. Slip the marker over and then carry on and knit 4 more stitches. Purl 1 stitch. And now we're going to jump into an 8 stitch repeat that we are going to repeat until 4 stitches before your second marker. That repeat goes as follows. You are going to knit 7, and then purl 1. And you're going to repeat that combination of knit 7, purl 1 until 4 stitches before your second marker, and that should come after you have worked a purl 1. These 4 stitches before your second marker, you are going to knit. Slip your second marker over and then knit 8 more stitches. Finish off the row by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 6 is actually a repeat of row 4, but I will go through it with you anyway. You are going to start by knitting 9 stitches, and that should take you to your first stitch marker. Slip that marker over and then purl the next 3 stitches. Knit the next stitch, purl the stitch after that, and then knit the stitch after that. Now we're going to jump into an 8 stitch repeat that we are going to work across our row until 3 stitches before our second marker, and that repeat goes as follows. You are going to purl 5, then knit 1, purl 1, and then knit 1 more. And you're going to repeat that 8 stitch combination until 3 stitches before your second marker, and as long as you count your stitches correctly, you should hit it after that final knit 1 of the repeat. These last 3 stitches before the second marker, you are just going to purl, slip the marker over and then knit 8 stitches. That just leaves us with our selvage stitch, and you are going to slip that purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 7 starts with knitting 9 stitches. That should take you to your first marker, and you're going to slip it over, and then you want to carry on and knit 2 more stitches. Purl the next stitch. And now you're going to jump into a 4 stitch repeat that you're going to work across your row until 2 stitches before your second marker, and that goes as follows. You are going to knit 3 and purl 1, and you're going to repeat that knit 3 purl 1 combination until 2 stitches before your second marker, and as long as you count your stitches correctly, you should hit that point after you have worked a purl 1. These 2 final stitches before your second marker, you are just going to knit, slip the marker over and then knit 8 more stitches. Last but not least, slip that last remaining stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 8 is the last row of our repeat, and you start by knitting 9 stitches. That should take you to your first marker. Just slip it over and then you are going to purl 1 stitch. Now you're going to jump into an 8 stitch repeat that you're going to repeat across your row until you hit your second marker, and that repeat goes as follows. You are going to knit 1, purl 5, then knit 1 and purl 1. And you're going to repeat that 8 stitch combination of knit 1, purl 5, knit 1, purl 1 until you hit your second marker, and if you've counted your stitches correctly, that should be after that final purl 1. Slip your second marker over when you reach it and then knit the next 8 stitches. That just leaves our selvage stitch, and we're going to slip that purlwise with the yarn in front. These 8 rows form the building blocks of our blanket, and they are what you will repeat over and over to grow the length of the blanket. So once you've worked row 8, you're going to go back and start again from row 1 and repeat the process as many times as you need to until your blanket is about 6 centimetres shorter than you want the overall length to be. In my case, to achieve an 80 centimetre long blanket, I repeated rows 1 to 8 a total of 29 times. Then what I do to achieve symmetry top and bottom is I work row 1 once more, and that just completes off our diamond pattern and makes everything look nice and symmetrical. Next thing to do after this middle textured panel is the top garter stitch border, and that's what we are going to tackle next. Just like the border at the beginning of our blanket, the top garter stitch border consists of 15 rows worked in exactly the same way. Once again, I'm going to walk you through the first row and then leave you to carry on and work rows 2 to 15 yourself. Just one thing to point out, that if you have worked that additional row 1 correctly, your first row of border should be a wrong side row, so you should have the wrong side of your work facing you when you start that first row. Once again, every stitch in each row of your border is the same with the exception of that final stitch, which is our selvage stitch. So you are going to want to start your row by knitting your way across your work. On this first row of your top garter stitch border, you can remove your stitch markers when you come to them, because we don't need to mark our side borders anymore, so it's just easier to get rid of them now rather than waiting until we cast off. So as you hit them, just remove them from your work and pop them to one side. So you're going to knit your way across your project until you reach that final stitch of the row. So when you have 1 stitch left in the row, you are going to slip that purlwise with the yarn in front. That should be a pretty familiar technique to you, as we've been working that final stitch in exactly the same way for the whole of the project. So that's row 1 complete. I'm going to go away and work rows 2 to 15, and I'll leave you to do the same, and then I'll come back and show you how we work the final row of our blanket, which is our cast off. The last row of any knitting project is always the cast off row, and for my blankets I like to use a very basic knitted cast off. Not only is it easy to work, but it means that the edge that you get looks the same as the cast on edge, so again it just all makes everything look seamless and matching. In this video I'm going to walk you through the first few stitches of the cast off and then leave you to carry on the rest yourself. But if you need a more in-depth video, if this technique is new to you, then I do have a beginner friendly one that I will link up at the top here now, and that goes through everything in much slower steps than I will do in this tutorial. To start your cast off, you want to knit 2 stitches. Don't knit them too tight, otherwise your cast off edge will pull in and your blanket won't lay flat. Once you've knitted those 2 stitches, you want to grab your left hand needle and pop it into the first stitch that you worked from left through to right. Hold the second stitch with your index finger so that it doesn't accidentally slip off, and then use your left hand needle to lift that first stitch up and over the second stitch and then completely off your right hand needle, and you should find that you've gone from 2 stitches on your needle to 1. Then you are going to knit 1 more stitch so that you go back up to 2 stitches on your needle, and then repeat the process of lifting the first stitch on the needle over the second. So pop your left hand needle in from left through to right lift it up and over the second stitch that you worked, and you should go again from 2 stitches on your right hand needle down to 1. And you're going to work your way across your row, repeating that knitting and lifting process until you have no stitches left to work on your left hand needle and just 1 stitch left on your right hand needle. And that is the point that I will rejoin you to show you how to finish everything off. Once you have just your final stitch on this right hand needle, you can cut your yarn. Make sure that you leave a long tail so that you can sew in your ends nice and neatly. And then one final thing that I like to do just to secure this final stitch nice and tightly is to lift up on the final stitch and make it slightly larger. And at this point you can get rid of your knitting needles, we don't need those anymore. Then I put my finger and my thumb through that big loop and grab the tail. Pull the tail all the way through so that it's passing through that loop, and then I give it a nice firm tug to tighten it right up. And then once I sew in my tail on the back of my work, it looks really nice and neat and tidy. A couple of final bits and bobs before I leave you to your knitting. I often get asked if a blanket design is reversible or not, and as is the case with most of my blankets, Noah is not a reversible design. There is nothing untidy about the back. If I flip it over, you can see that it just doesn't have quite the same defined pattern that the front does, but you do still get these indentations that form diamond shapes. So in a way, it's reversible because it looks good on both sides. It just doesn't look the same. For those of you that prefer written instructions to follow along to, I of course have a free version of my written pattern on my blog, and then I also have links to an ad-free PDF that you can buy if you'd prefer to have something to print off and take away with you rather than relying on a screen to read the instructions. And then the last thing for me to do before I go is to leave you with some more inspiration in case this isn't quite the right project for you to knit right now.